Hello, I'm Mary Fitzgerald. I'm Editor-in-Chief of openDemocracy. This is Regan Ralph, President of the Fund for Global Human Rights. And we're going to be talking today about our partnership, looking at how you enable social change. So you're a human rights funder, but perhaps not as we might traditionally understand it. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. I think people traditionally have thought of human rights, and this is just because of the evolution of the human rights movement, as a pretty legalistic undertaking that's focused on international norms and standards. And certainly our work starts with the international covenants on civil and political and economic, social and cultural rights. But what we do is support local actors to take the norms of human rights, the moral language of human rights, and give it local legs. So they make it real in the context in which they operate.
So for example?
So if you look, for example, at traditional development projects that build wells in communities, I had this conversation with somebody early trying to help them understand what the model that we pursue brings to the table. He said, well, we don't fund human rights, we fund potable water. And I said, okay, what happens when the local strongman realizes that there's one well where everybody can get potable water, and because there's no rule of law in the community, he's going to set up a fence around that well and require people to pay him. And if they don't have money, they won't get access to your well. Then what do you do? And he said, well, that's not a problem for us, that's a problem for somebody else. And so that's a problem for us. We want systems that actually protect people's ability to look after their own interests. The signature of almost every organization that we work with at the fund is that they are deeply rooted in the communities that on whose behalf they advocate. And sometimes they're deeply rooted by providing services. Sometimes they're deeply rooted by doing strategic litigation. Sometimes they're deeply rooted because they lead protest movements. But they all are of and from the communities whose interests they're trying to advance. And that's really important. It's really important because they know what they're talking about. And they have a stake in the outcome. They also are in a position to be vigilant on a day in and day out basis, and to see what's happening, and to be able to send up the alarm when things go wrong.
And so why should people or organizations that want to support getting water to people, building wells, etc., be supporting this work as well?
Well, because that's how they make sure that their wells and their development projects actually have meaning for the people that they're trying to get them to. Because otherwise you're just creating a power dynamic where people require help all the time and aren't in a position to demand what they need for themselves and take control of that. And I think that's really the outcome that development desires, is people standing up on their own 2 feet and having their own access to education and creating their own opportunities. That's what a rights framework gives them the power to do.
You're funding social movements, but you're kind of shaping them as well, or helping to shape them. Do you feel like that you are helping to do that?
I don't know that I would say that, actually. I think that I use the word a lot, the word ally. We are in constant conversation with the organizations and movements that we support, but I really do think that they set the agenda. And in that sense, there is not shaping happening, there is facilitation happening. If you look, for example, at Guatemala, we supported a women's organization to work with a group of indigenous women who had been forced into sexual and domestic slavery by the Guatemalan military during the Civil War. This women's legal group represented them when they decided to sue the Guatemalan army, which was obviously the body that had enslaved them. These women had no formal education. They don't even speak Spanish. They speak their indigenous language. And they worked with this organization to sue the Guatemalan army, and they won. And the intellectual author and some of the actual perpetrators of those crimes were sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, and the Guatemalan state was ordered to pay reparations. Now, getting the reparations out of the Guatemalan government is another matter altogether, but that was totally groundbreaking when it happened just a couple of years ago. And that shows the importance of letting the local organizations set the agenda, because they know how to create those openings. We don't. But we support them when they see them. And we, as one of our grantees from Uganda who runs a women's rights organization says, you go to the fund with these crazy ideas and they support you.
There has been debate and criticism about imposing Western liberal values on countries in the global South, cultural imperialism, call it what you will. What do you say to those kind of critiques, particularly in this moment?
I think that conversation is being had not just in the global south, but in every country that we know of. I'm American, and we're having that conversation in the United States right now. In fact, to call it a conversation is probably too gentle a way to describe it. But I think people are really fighting for control over identity and language at the national level in ways that frankly, I couldn't have imagined 5 or 10 years ago. And so what I've always said, and I'm a women's human rights activist, and so I've heard for my entire career that I was a Western feminist imposing my agenda on women all over the world. And to that I respond, you know, how long do women of the world have to wait to be able to claim their own identities and decide what their rights should look like? I'm not telling them what to do, and neither should you. You know, this is a global project, and that's why the Fund for Global Human Rights looks the way it does. It's why we don't shape the agenda. We let others shape the agenda, because it doesn't start with us. We don't export it. We support it where it is. And that's something that I think that's a straw person that is put up that's pretty easy to take apart the minute you dig under the surface. Because I've never been anywhere in my life where everybody thought the same way. And I've never been anywhere in my life, and I've been a lot of places, where there weren't people who were talking about something that looked like human rights. And I think some of the most important work in building popular constituencies for human rights is giving those rights that cultural legitimacy, that flavor that is local and that resonates with local people.